Hello, Jennifer Adams here, and I want to welcome you to week 2 in our Advent study. This weekend, we will be lighting the second candle of Advent, and it is the peace candle. So I want to talk with you a little bit today about the peace that Jesus came to bring. In Isaiah 9:6, it's a passage that we hear so often at Christmas time. It says this. It says, "For a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace." The Prince of Peace. That was Jesus. And at Christmas time, of course, we are celebrating the birth of Jesus, that baby, born in Bethlehem in a manger to two poor, probably scared out of their minds, young Jewish kids. Here came the Son of God, the Prince of Peace. And Jesus came to bring us two different kinds of peace. The first one was peace with God. I want to read you a couple passages. First one is in Ephesians 2. It's Ephesians 2 verses 13 and 14. And it says this. It says, "But now, in Christ Jesus, you who were far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he is our peace, who made both groups one and tore down the dividing tore down the dividing wall of hostility." Jesus came to bring us peace with God. Because of the birth and the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus, we now have a relationship restored with God. A relationship that had been broken all the way since Adam and Eve took the bite of that fruit and they disobeyed God. As soon as that happened and sin entered the picture, there had been this chasm between God and man. And throughout the Old Testament, we see all of the laws and the sacrificial system that God put in place so that the people could continue to have relationship with him. But it required lots of sacrifices and lots of laws that they had to keep. And when Jesus came, he came as the ultimate sacrifice, and he paid the price that we could not pay. A sinless man who died for us. And because of that, we now have access to the God of the universe, the one who created us. He made peace available to us so that we can have that relationship with God. So that was the initial peace that Jesus came to bring. And listen, we could stop right there because that was enough. I would say that Jesus came to bring us peace with God. But Jesus didn't stop there. That wasn't the only kind of peace that he came to bring. He also came to bring us the peace of God. And there's a verse I want to read you in John 14:27. In John 14:27, it says this. "Peace," and this is Jesus speaking, and he says, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give you as the world gives. Don't let your heart be troubled or fearful." Listen, Jesus came as the Prince of Peace. He came bearing this gift for us. And he gives it to each one of us as a child of God. The gift of peace, it is available to you. But I find it interesting in that verse that it says not only does he come leaving peace and giving peace, but then he ends the verse by saying, "Don't let your heart be troubled. Don't be fearful." And that phrase right there, "do not fear," we see that all over Scripture, time and time and time again, because God knows our human nature. And this is something that we all struggle with. And so when I read this verse, I realize, okay, yes, God has made peace available to us, but we have a choice to make. Are we going to choose peace? I want to read a part of the Christmas story to you. We're going to be in Matthew. If you've got your Bibles and you want to turn, it's Matthew 2. And we're going to read Matthew 2, verses 1 to 12. And it says this: After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and the scribes of the people and asked them where the Christ would be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," they told him, "because this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." So then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, and he said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him." So after hearing the king, they went on their way, and there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came, and it stopped above the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. And entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures, and they presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. Okay, so let's talk for just a minute about Herod and this group of wise men. So first of all, Herod, King Herod in here, he was known as Herod the Great. And Herod and later his sons ruled this whole area. They were the king of the Jews for this time period. Now, Herod the Great was a very cruel tyrant. And when you read a little bit of his story, you realize why the people didn't like him, why they were afraid of him. The guy was crazy. He did do some great things during his time in power. He rebuilt the temple. In fact, he brought the temple in Jerusalem back to the glory of the King Solomon days, if not even greater. And so there were some really spectacular things that he did, which is why they called him Herod the Great. But the man was cruel. He was paranoid. He was so concerned with keeping his position and his title, his authority, that he would eliminate any threat, and he was very prone to believe any conspiracy theory that came out. In fact, when you read the history of him, he was killing people all the time. Anybody that he thought was a threat or heard any whisper of a threat, he would kill them, including several of his sons, including a wife. I think there was a mother or a mother-in-law in the mix. I mean, the man, well, there was no end to his trying to protect his throne. And so you have to understand, when these wise men show up in Jerusalem and they come to Herod looking for this new king of the Jews that has been born, this sends Herod into a panic. And it tells us here that he was deeply disturbed. And then I think it's interesting that right after that it says, "and all Jerusalem with him." Because listen, when this man got disturbed, you wanted to get out of his way. And so he was making everybody nervous. There was a lot of chaos going on in this scene. And then you have the wise men. The wise men come. We don't know a lot about them. It just says that they were wise men who came from the east. Many scholars believe they came from Babylon, which, if that's the case, that was like 900 miles away. That was a long distance. This was a long journey they had been on, if that was indeed where they came from. But somewhere in the east, most believe that they were some sort of astronomers or astrologers, men who studied the sky and the stars looking for signs. And that's about all we know about them. But they show up, and I think it's interesting that they come to Jerusalem first, because that was the logical location for a new king to be born. So they head straight to the palace looking for this baby, because that's where they assume he will be. And of course, that's not where they find him. And instead, they find him in Bethlehem, and not in the place where you would find a king. In fact, we don't know exactly how old Jesus was when they showed up. It does say that they showed up. They entered a house and saw the child with Mary. And so there are some that believe that Jesus was a little bit older at this point. This was not the manger scene depicted in our nativity scenes. This was probably when Jesus was a little bit older, maybe 1 or 2. We don't know for sure, but the passage would indicate that he may have been a little bit older at this time. But they show up to worship him. They are following this star. Now, like I said before, there's a lot of chaos going on in this story. Herod is in an uproar. He is calling everybody together. Where am I going to find this baby? He is panicked, okay? Deeply disturbed. And so you know that all the people around him, there is a lot of tension in the air. And I think so often when we hear the word peace, our first thought of peace is the absence of conflict or struggle, this kind of quiet, this stillness. But the peace that Jesus came to bring was different. There's a passage in John 16:33 I want to read you. It says this: I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. And then he says, you will have suffering in this world. Be courageous. I have conquered the world. The truth is that we are going to have troubles. We live in a broken world. There are going to be hard seasons. We are not exempt from that. And yet, Jesus says, in the midst of that, that is where I come and where I give you peace. Peace in the midst of our troubles. Because peace is a soul that is calm and at rest despite the storms that are raging around it. And I know I have found that true in my own life. It is when things are often the hardest that I encounter that peace. It just goes beyond all understanding. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's not anything I can work up in my own strength or own abilities. It is a peace that comes from God. It is supernatural, and it is the peace that brings calm to my soul when there does not look like there should be any calm. And so how do we hold on to that kind of peace? Let's look again at Herod and the wise men. And like I said, there was a lot of chaos going on in here, and the chaos is going to continue in the verses after this. But in the midst of this chaos, here we have this baby, this young child, the Prince of Peace. And how do we hold on to that kind of peace when we are in the middle of a storm? Well, first thing is that we have to trust in God's sovereignty. We have to trust that He has a plan, He knows what He's doing, and we can trust Him, that He is sovereign. There is a verse in Isaiah 26, verse 3 that I love and I want to share with you. And it says this. It says, you, talking about God here, it says, you will keep the mind that is dependent on you in perfect peace, for it is trusting in you. I want to read that one more time, and I want you to really listen to the words. You will keep the mind that is dependent on you in perfect peace, for it is trusting in you. Perfect peace. What's required there? That our mind, two things, that our mind is dependent on Him. This means that we are taking our thoughts captive, because listen, it is your mind and it is your thoughts that will send you into that spiral of worry and fear and what ifs and all the different possible scenarios, when God says, hey, I need your mind to be focused on me, dependent on me. That is where we find that perfect peace. And it also says, and it's big part of it is trusting Him. We trust Him that He has a plan, that He's good, that He's faithful, that He knows what He's doing, that He's working behind the scenes even when we can't see it. And when we can trust Him, it gives us that peace, that ability to just stop and to breathe and to just go, okay, I don't understand what's happening here, but I'm going to trust you. And I'm going to keep my mind focused on you. And because of that, I will have perfect peace. Now, in this story of Herod And the wise men, Herod, we see Herod, there is no peace with Herod. Herod is deeply disturbed, it says. He is in a panic. And remember, his number one fear is losing his throne, losing his power, losing his authority. And so he is going to hold on to it at all costs. He hears about a new baby being born called King of the Jews. This is an immediate threat, and he needs to eliminate it. So there is all kinds of chaos going on here with Herod, and there is no peace. But then you look at the wise men, and the wise men are thrust. I mean, they just show up. They just show up to Jerusalem to celebrate this new king. Isn't everybody celebrating the new king? And they just stir up a hornet's nest, right? And all of a sudden, everybody's in a tizzy. Everybody's running around in a panic. And the wise men are like, hey, we've just come to follow the star. Something's going on, and we're going to keep following it. And so they continue on their journey. They keep following the star. And it says that when they saw the star, they responded with great joy. And then I want you to see again, as they show up at the house where Mary and Jesus are and Joseph. And it says they saw the child with Mary his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshiped him. Now, this made no sense. The situation made no sense. This King of the Jews wasn't in Jerusalem. He wasn't at the palace. He was way over here with this poor teenage mom. What was this? But yet they didn't ask questions. They just fell down and worshiped because they were in the presence of God, the Son of God, God in the flesh, Emmanuel, God with us. Here was Jesus, the Prince of Peace. And, that just brings me to the second point, is that in order to hold on to that kind of peace, we have to stay close to Jesus. In order to keep our minds dependent on him, we have to stay close to him, because peace is found in God's presence. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He is peace. And so when we are spending time with him, when we are staying close to him, we are going to encounter that peace of God that just fills us and surpasses all understanding. We can't make sense of it, but it's very real, the peace that Jesus came to bring. And so we have two choices to make. We can either be like Herod, and we can worry when things come up that were not in our plan. This was not on his radar. What are you talking about? A new king. And it sent him into a panic of worry and fear, and it just spiraled from there. Or we can respond like the wise men, and we can say, God is doing something. Something is happening. I don't want to miss it, and I'm just going to worship. I'm going to go straight to where Jesus is, where God is. I'm going to fall down on my knees, and I'm going to worship. And listen, only one of those two responses will give us peace. And it's not worry, it's worship. When we worship, when we spend time with Jesus, that's when we encounter real peace. And the passage, the next verses after verse 12 in Matthew 2, it says this: and after they were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, get up, take the child, his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, he took the child, his mother, during the night, and they escaped to Egypt, and they stayed there until Herod's death. Listen, Mary and Joseph, this whole time period for them, I don't think anything was going according to plan. I don't think they foresaw having to get up in the middle of the night, grab their new baby, the Son of God, anything they could grab that night, and flee for their lives to a new country to live until, they didn't know how long, until this Herod died. And I don't think this was part of their plan, but yet they knew that God was trustworthy, that he had a plan, that he was sovereign. And so they were just going to obey and trust him. And in that trusting, it gives them peace. And I love the fact that it was the wise men who had just shown up at the birth of Jesus with these 3 very costly gifts: frankincense, myrrh, gold. And I can't help but think that those gifts, a small part of that was provision for this middle of the night, flee for their life trip that they were getting ready to make. something they had not planned for. But God says, I know, I knew this was coming. I'm making provision for what's coming. And here they had what they needed to go and move and move to a new land and set up a new home for a season. So we can trust God. We can trust that He has a plan, and there is peace that is found in that. So I don't know what you're going through today, what storms may be raging in your life, but I want to encourage you today that in the midst of that storm, that Jesus comes to bring peace. So stay close to Him today. Let Him fill you with His peace. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week for week 3 of Advent as we look at the topic of joy. I'll see you then.